There is a moment that happens quietly inside almost every human being. Something goes wrong, and before anyone else has the chance to judge you, you judge yourself. Before someone tells you that you are not good enough, you tell yourself. Before someone points out your mistake, you replay it again and again in your own mind. You become your own prosecutor, your own critic, your own enemy, and sometimes you don't even realize how harshly you are speaking to the person you are supposed to protect. You wake up carrying yesterday's mistakes. You walk through the day carrying today's worries. You go to sleep carrying tomorrow's fears. And somewhere between all of these moments, your inner voice keeps repeating the same messages. You should have done better. You are falling behind. Everyone else is moving forward. You always make mistakes. You are not disciplined enough. You are not strong enough. You are not where you should be. Listen carefully to those words. Would you speak to someone you love that way? If your closest friend came to you after failing, would you look them in the eyes and tell them they were worthless? If someone you cared about made a mistake, would you tell them they had ruined their entire future? If someone you loved was afraid, would you laugh at them and tell them they were weak? Most likely, you would not. You would tell them to breathe. You would tell them to learn. You would tell them that one failure does not erase everything they have accomplished. You would remind them that they can begin again. But when it comes to yourself, something changes. You become impatient. You become cruel. You demand perfection. You expect yourself to understand everything immediately. And when you don't, you attack yourself. This is one of the most dangerous habits a person can develop because it can look like discipline from the outside. You tell yourself, I'm just being honest with myself. But honesty does not require cruelty. Accountability does not require humiliation. Discipline does not require self-hatred. There is a difference between telling yourself the truth and using the truth as a weapon against yourself. The truth may be that you wasted your time. Then say, I wasted time. I need to change how I use tomorrow. The truth may be that you made a bad decision. Then say, that decision was wrong. I will learn from it. The truth may be that you were not prepared. Then say, I was not prepared. I will train harder. Notice the difference. One voice attacks the person, the other corrects the behavior. One voice says, you are a failure. The other says, that attempt failed. One says, you are lazy. The other says, you have been avoiding the work and you need to take responsibility. One destroys identity. The other builds character. This is the kind of inner discipline you must practice. A Shaolin master does not become stronger by constantly insulting the body for being tired. The body is trained through repetition, patience, discomfort, and recovery. The mind is no different. If every difficult experience becomes an opportunity to attack yourself, your mind will eventually associate challenge with punishment. Then you will start avoiding difficult things. You will avoid starting because you are afraid of failing. You will avoid trying because you are afraid of being judged. You will avoid taking risks because you don't want to hear that voice inside your head again. And slowly, you begin choosing comfort, not because you love comfort, but because you are afraid of your own reaction to failure. This is why you must learn to become your own teacher instead of your own enemy. A teacher can be demanding. A teacher can say, you need to work harder. A teacher can say, your technique is wrong. A teacher can say, you are capable of more. But a true teacher does not destroy the student for making mistakes. The purpose of correction is growth. The purpose of discipline is development. The purpose of pain is not always punishment. Sometimes pain is information. Your frustration may be telling you that something needs to change. Your disappointment may be showing you what matters. Your fear may be revealing where you need courage. Your failure may be exposing a weakness that you can train. But if you immediately attack yourself, you lose the lesson because all your energy becomes focused on the pain of judgment. You stop asking, what can I learn from this? You start asking, what's wrong with me? That question rarely makes you stronger. What can I learn creates movement. What's wrong with me often creates shame. Shame says, I am bad. Responsibility says, I did something I need to correct. Shame attacks identity. Responsibility transforms behavior. You need more responsibility and less self-destruction. For the next 3 days, whenever you catch yourself insulting yourself, stop. Not because you should pretend that everything is fine. Stop because you are trying to train your mind. If you hear yourself say, I'm so stupid, replace it with, I made a mistake and I can learn from it. If you hear yourself say, I'll never succeed, replace it with, I haven't succeeded yet, but I can continue improving. If you hear yourself say, I'm too far behind, replace it with, I can only control what I do from this moment forward. If you hear yourself say, I'm weak, replace it with, there is an area of my life where I need to become stronger. This isn't about repeating magical words. It is about changing the relationship you have with yourself. Your mind should not become a courtroom where you are constantly on trial. It should become a training ground, a place where you examine your actions, a place where you recognize weakness, a place where you practice patience, a place where you develop discipline, a place where you return after every fall. Imagine a warrior who falls during training. He doesn't lie on the ground and spend the next hour insulting himself. He gets up. He studies what happened. He adjusts his position. He tries again. That is the mentality you need. Fall. Observe. Adjust. Rise. Repeat. This pattern is more powerful than perfection. You will make mistakes. You will lose focus. You will have days when your discipline disappears. You will have moments when fear wins. You will sometimes choose the easier path. You will sometimes disappoint yourself. That does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. The question is not whether you will fall. The question is what voice will meet you when you do. Will it say, "See, I told you that you couldn't do it"? Or will it say, "Stand up, we have work to do"? That second voice is the one you need to build, because there will be moments when nobody else believes in you. There will be moments when people misunderstand you. There will be moments when your progress is invisible. There will be moments when your results are slow. There will be moments when you feel alone. In those moments, the relationship you have with yourself becomes extremely important. If your inner voice is constantly attacking you, difficult seasons become almost unbearable. But if your inner voice becomes calm, disciplined, and patient, you can walk through difficult seasons without losing your direction. You can say, "This hurts, but I can handle this moment." You can say, "I don't understand everything yet, but I don't need to." You can say, "I am disappointed, but I am not finished." You can say, "I lost something, but I have not lost myself." These words don't remove the pain. They give you the strength to carry it. There is a misconception that strong people don't struggle. Strong people struggle. Strong people feel fear. Strong people experience disappointment. Strong people become tired. Strong people have moments of doubt. The difference is that they learn not to turn every difficult emotion into a permanent identity. They can feel fear without saying, "I am a coward." They can feel sadness without saying, "I am weak." They can experience failure without saying, "I am a failure." They can experience rejection without saying, "I am unwanted." An emotion is something you experience. It is not necessarily who you are. A situation is something you are going through. It is not necessarily where you are going. This distinction can completely change the way you walk through life. When you stop speaking to yourself like an enemy, you don't become soft. you become more stable. You become capable of correcting yourself without destroying yourself. You become capable of facing reality without running from it. You become capable of saying, I was wrong, without feeling that your entire identity has collapsed. That is real strength. It takes strength to admit weakness. It takes strength to accept responsibility. It takes strength to start again. It takes strength to forgive yourself while still demanding better from yourself. Forgiveness does not mean lowering your standards. It means refusing to remain trapped in yesterday. Maybe you wasted years. Maybe you made choices you regret. Maybe you trusted the wrong people. Maybe you ignored opportunities. Maybe you allowed fear to control you. You cannot go backward. You can only decide what happens next. And if you spend all your energy attacking the person you used to be, you have less energy available to become the person you want to be. Your past needs to become a teacher, not a prison. Study it, learn from it, respect the lessons, then continue walking. There is no strength in repeatedly punishing yourself for something you can no longer change. There is strength in taking the lesson and carrying it forward. For these 3 days, practice speaking to yourself with the same patience you would offer someone you genuinely care about. When you wake up, don't begin with criticism. Don't immediately look at everything you haven't accomplished. Start with one simple statement. I have another day to train, another day to improve, another day to learn, another day to become more disciplined, another day to make one better decision. And when the day becomes difficult, remember that you don't need to win the entire battle at once. Win the next minute. Take the next breath. Complete the next task. Make the next decision. Wash the next dish. Finish the next page. Complete the next workout. Send the next message. Do the next thing that your future self will respect. The mind becomes stronger through small acts of obedience. You don't need to feel powerful before you act. Acts. And strength begins to develop. You don't need to feel confident before you begin. Begin. And confidence can grow through experience. You don't need to know the entire path. You only need enough awareness to take the next step. And when you make a mistake on that step, don't become your enemy. Become your teacher. Ask what happened. Ask what you can change. Ask what you can practice. Ask what you can do differently. Then move, because your life does not need another voice telling you that you are hopeless. It needs a voice that tells you to get back up. Your life does not need another voice reminding you of every mistake. It needs a voice that extracts the lesson from every mistake. Your life does not need another voice comparing your journey to everyone else's. It needs a voice that brings your attention back to your own path, and your life does not need perfection from you. It needs your presence, your honesty, your discipline, and your willingness to continue training the mind every time the old voice returns and tries to make you believe that one bad moment means you are a bad person, that one failure means you will always fail, that one rejection means you are not worthy, that one difficult season means your future has already been decided. Because the moment you stop attacking yourself and start teaching yourself, you create the possibility of facing the same challenge with a different mind, a different response, a different level of patience, and a different willingness to rise again. There is a part of you that you know, and there is another part of you that you have spent your entire life avoiding. The first part is visible to the world. It is the person who wakes up in the morning, goes to work, speaks to friends, fulfills responsibilities, makes decisions, smiles when necessary, and performs the role that life has assigned. But beneath this familiar personality exists something deeper, quieter, and often far more powerful. It is the hidden self. Most people move through life without ever truly meeting this hidden part of themselves. They become skilled at appearing to know who they are. They build identities around their profession, their relationships, their achievements, their failures, their beliefs, and the opinions of others. Over time, these identities become so familiar that they begin to feel like the whole person. Yet, the human being is never completely contained by the personality presented to the world. There are thoughts you do not speak, feelings you do not permit yourself to feel, desires you consider unacceptable, fears you disguise as confidence, anger you bury beneath politeness, weaknesses you hide behind achievement. Even qualities you admire in others may reveal something that exists within you but has not yet been consciously recognized. This is where the hidden self begins to appear. It does not usually announce itself directly. It may emerge through an unexpected emotional reaction, a recurring dream, an irrational fear, an intense attraction, an unexplained resentment, or a pattern of behavior that you repeatedly promise yourself you will change. You may ask, why did I react that way? Or why does this person affect me so deeply? Or why do I keep returning to the same situation even though I know it hurts me? These questions are important because the conscious mind often tells only part of the story. We like to believe that we understand the reasons behind our actions. We imagine ourselves as rational beings who carefully choose what we think, what we desire, and how we behave. But beneath conscious thought, there are layers of experience that influence us without asking for permission. Memories, instincts, emotional associations, childhood experiences, fears, fantasies, and unresolved conflicts can quietly shape the direction of our lives. The hidden self is not simply a collection of everything negative about you. It contains rejected parts of your personality, but it can also contain strengths that you have never developed. Perhaps you learned early in life that expressing anger was dangerous, so you became agreeable. Perhaps you were taught that ambition was selfish, so you learned to suppress your desire to achieve. Perhaps you were repeatedly told that sensitivity was weakness, so you built a hard exterior and forgot how deeply you could feel. What is rejected does not necessarily disappear. It may simply move out of conscious awareness. And what remains outside awareness can continue to influence the person who believes he is completely free from it. This is one of the uncomfortable truths of inner life. The things we refuse to acknowledge do not become powerless merely because we refuse to look at them. Sometimes they become more powerful precisely because they remain unseen. A person who refuses to acknowledge his anger may become controlled by it. A person who refuses to admit his insecurity may spend his life seeking admiration. A person who cannot tolerate his vulnerability may become obsessed with appearing strong. A person who fears failure may unconsciously avoid every opportunity that could truly test him. From the outside, these behaviors may appear unrelated. From within, they can be expressions of the same hidden conflict. The mind has many ways of protecting itself. It creates explanations. It creates excuses. It creates identities. It creates stories that allow us to continue believing that we understand ourselves. But there comes a moment when the story becomes impossible to maintain. Perhaps a relationship breaks apart. Perhaps success fails to bring the satisfaction you expected. Perhaps you reach a goal and discover that the emptiness remains. Perhaps you lose something that gave your life structure. Or perhaps nothing dramatic happens at all. Yet one morning you simply realize that the person you have been pretending to be is no longer sustainable. This moment can feel like a crisis, but it can also become an invitation. The hidden self often becomes visible when the old identity begins to weaken. This is why periods of uncertainty can be psychologically significant. When familiar structures disappear, the mind is forced to confront material that was previously kept at a distance. The person who always knew what to do suddenly does not know. The person who always appeared confident discovers fear. The person who spent years pleasing everyone begins asking what he actually wants. It can be frightening because the conscious personalities prefer certainty. It wants clear answers. It wants to know who is right, who is wrong, what should happen next, and what everything means. But the deeper parts of the psyche do not always speak in simple answers. They often communicate through symbols, emotions, contradictions, dreams, memories, and repeated patterns. They ask questions before they provide explanations. Who are you when nobody is watching? What remains when your achievements are removed? What would you choose if you were no longer trying to impress anyone? Which parts of yourself have you rejected because someone else told you they were unacceptable? Which qualities in other people provoke unusually strong reactions within you? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, how much of your life has been shaped by the desire to become someone you thought you were supposed to be? These questions can disturb the surface of a carefully constructed identity. Yet disturbance is not always destruction. Sometimes it is the beginning of awareness. To become conscious of the hidden self does not mean accepting every impulse or acting upon every desire. It means becoming capable of observing what exists within you without immediately denying it. There is a profound difference between saying, "I am angry," and saying, "There is anger within me, and I need to understand what it is trying to reveal." There is a difference between being controlled by fear and becoming curious about fear. There is a difference between being ashamed of your weakness and recognizing what your weakness has been trying to protect. The goal is not to become perfect. Perfection is often another mask. The deeper task is to become whole. Wholeness requires honesty, and honesty with oneself can be more difficult than honesty with anyone else. You can deceive another person with a carefully chosen sentence. You can create an impressive image through clothing, achievements, wealth, intelligence, confidence, or social status. You can even convince an entire room that you are someone you are not. But when you are alone, the performance becomes harder to maintain. Silence has a way of revealing what noise can conceal. This is why solitude can become uncomfortable. When there are no distractions, no audience, and no immediate responsibilities demanding attention, the hidden material of the psyche may begin to surface. Thoughts appear that you did not invite, memories return, questions become louder. Emotions you avoided during the day become impossible to ignore at night. Many people respond by immediately escaping. They reach for entertainment. They fill every quiet moment with noise. They seek constant stimulation. They move from one relationship to another, one achievement to another, one distraction to another. Not because they are necessarily weak, but because silence can reveal a truth that the conscious personality has been working very hard to avoid. Yet if you remain with yourself long enough, something changes. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to recognize that certain situations repeatedly awaken the same emotional response. You begin to see that certain people trigger qualities within you that you would rather not acknowledge. You begin to recognize that some of your strongest judgments may contain information about your own unresolved inner life. The person who constantly irritates you may not simply be annoying. The failure that you cannot forgive yourself for may not simply be a mistake. The dream that keeps returning or may not simply be meaningless imagery. The fear that appears whenever you approach something important may not simply be an obstacle. Each may be pointing towards something deeper. This does not mean every feeling should be treated as an absolute truth. The inner world is complicated. Not every impulse deserves obedience, and not every emotion accurately describes reality. The purpose of looking inward is not to surrender judgment. It is to develop a deeper form of judgment, one that includes awareness of the forces operating beneath conscious intention. The hidden self becomes less frightening when it becomes familiar. What once seemed like an enemy can become information. Anger can reveal violated boundaries. Fear can reveal what matters. Envy can expose an undeveloped desire. Shame can reveal an area where you have confused your humanity with your worth. Grief can reveal the depth of attachment. Loneliness can reveal a need for genuine connection rather than superficial attention. The emotion itself may not be the final answer, but it may be the doorway. And behind that doorway is a part of you that has been waiting to be recognized. This is where inner development begins, not with constructing a more impressive personality, but with becoming conscious of the personality you already have. Not with pretending that darkness does not exist, but with becoming capable of looking at it without immediately turning away. Because the hidden self is not asking to destroy you, it is asking to be seen. And when a person begins to see himself more honestly, something remarkable happens. He becomes less dependent upon the approval of the outside world. He no longer needs to spend every moment proving that he is strong, intelligent, successful, desirable, or worthy. He can begin to live from a deeper center rather than constantly reacting to the expectations surrounding him. The world may still demand performance. Society may still assign roles. Other people may still have opinions. But the person who has begun to encounter his hidden self develops an inner reference point. He begins to recognize the difference between what truly belongs to him and what he has merely inherited from family, culture, society, fear, or expectation. And that recognition can change the entire direction of a life. Because the greatest danger is not that you have a hidden self. The greatest danger is living your entire life without realizing that it is there. There is a strange contradiction at the center of human life. We like to believe that we are the authors of our decisions. Yet much of what moves us begins before we are consciously aware of it. A thought appears, an emotion rises, an attraction takes hold, a fear suddenly awakens, and only afterward does the conscious mind begin constructing an explanation. We tell ourselves why we reacted, why we chose, why we stayed, why we walked away. But the explanation often arrives after the movement has already begun. This hidden influence is what makes the unconscious so important. The unconscious is not simply a dark basement filled with forgotten memories. It is a living psychological dimension that continues to shape perception, emotion, imagination, behavior, and meaning. It contains experiences that have not been fully integrated, instincts that operate beneath deliberate thought, patterns formed through years of living, and possibilities within us that consciousness has not yet developed. You may believe that you are choosing your life freely while repeating patterns you never consciously chose. You may believe that you are selecting the same kind of relationship because of preference, when something deeper is pulling you toward a familiar emotional experience. You may believe that you are avoiding a particular opportunity because it is not right for you, when underneath the reasoning there may be a fear of failure, exposure, rejection, or transformation. The conscious mind can be remarkably convincing. It can create beautiful explanations for unconscious motives. This is why simply knowing what you think is not always enough to understand why you live the way you do. Imagine a person who repeatedly chooses situations in which he must prove his worth. He works harder than everyone around him. He achieves more. He receives recognition. Yet the satisfaction disappears quickly, and he immediately searches for another challenge. From the outside, he may appear ambitious and disciplined. Perhaps he is. But beneath the ambition, there may be another force, a deeply rooted belief that he is valuable only when he is accomplishing something. He may never consciously say this to himself. In fact, He may strongly reject the idea. He may say, I simply enjoy success. But his behavior may reveal something more complicated. The unconscious often speaks through repetition. What consciousness ignores, life may repeatedly place before us. The same conflict appears with different people. The same disappointment emerges in different circumstances. The same emotional wound is touched again and again. We may blame the changing characters around us, never noticing the pattern connecting them. This does not mean that every repeated experience is our fault. Life contains genuine injustice, unpredictable events, and circumstances beyond our control. But within those circumstances, there can still be psychological patterns worth examining. The unconscious does not ask permission before influencing us. It can shape what we notice and what we ignore. Two people can enter the same room and experience entirely different realities. One sees opportunity, another sees danger. One hears criticism, another hears useful information. One interprets silence as peace, another interprets it as rejection. The external event may be identical. The internal meaning is not, and meaning is powerful. Much of human suffering does not come only from what happens, but from what the mind unconsciously makes of what happens. A person who carries an unconscious expectation of rejection may interpret a delayed message as evidence of abandonment. Someone carrying an unconscious fear of failure may interpret a small mistake as proof of incompetence. Someone who secretly believes that people cannot be trusted may interpret kindness as manipulation. The conscious mind sees the event, the unconscious supplies the emotional atmosphere surrounding it. This is why self-knowledge cannot be limited to intellectual analysis. You can read books about yourself for years and still remain trapped inside patterns you do not recognize while they are happening. There are things the mind understands only when they are experienced. A person may know intellectually that perfection is impossible, yet still feel unbearable anxiety whenever something goes wrong. He may understand that other people's opinions do not define his worth, yet still spend hours wondering how he was perceived. He may know that the past cannot be changed, yet continue allowing an old wound to determine present decisions. Knowledge has entered the conscious mind, but the deeper pattern has not yet been transformed. This is one reason dreams have fascinated psychologists, philosophers, and human beings across cultures for centuries. During waking life, consciousness is constantly organizing experience according to practical demands. We work, speak, calculate, plan, and control. But when the ordinary structure of consciousness relaxes, the psyche can express itself in another language. Dreams do not always speak directly. They speak through images. A house may represent something within the personality. A journey may symbolize movement through an inner transition. A stranger may carry qualities that the dreamer has not recognized in himself. A locked room may suggest something psychologically inaccessible. A recurring landscape may carry emotional meaning that cannot be reduced to a simple literal interpretation. The important point is not to treat every dream as a supernatural message. The important point is to recognize that the psyche communicates in more than one language. Sometimes an image can express what a sentence cannot. Sometimes a feeling reveals what an argument conceals. Sometimes a sudden emotional reaction contains more psychological information than an hour of deliberate reasoning. The unconscious can also appear through what we call intuition. There are moments when you sense that something is wrong before you can explain why. There are moments when a person feels familiar despite being a stranger. There are moments when an opportunity feels deeply significant, even though you cannot yet articulate the reason. Intuition should not be confused with certainty. It can be influenced by fear, bias, memory, and unconscious assumptions. But it demonstrates something important. The mind is constantly processing information beyond the narrow field of conscious attention. You notice more than you realize. You remember more than you remember remembering. You feel more than you can immediately explain. And all of this contributes to the psychological world from which decisions emerge. The unconscious can therefore be both an obstacle and a source of possibility. When it remains unknown, it may control you. When it becomes conscious, it can become part of your psychological freedom. This is why self-awareness is not simply about thinking positively. Positive thinking can become another form of avoidance when it is used to cover uncomfortable realities. If you are afraid, pretending that you are fearless does not necessarily make you courageous. If you are angry, repeating affirmations about peace does not automatically resolve the anger. If you feel envy, convincing yourself that you never compare yourself to anyone may only push the feeling deeper. Real psychological development begins when you can say, without immediately condemning yourself, this exists within me. That simple recognition creates distance. You are not identical to every thought that passes through your mind. You are not identical to every emotion that enters your body. You are not identical to every impulse that arises. You can observe, and observation creates the possibility of choice. Suppose anger appears. The unconscious reaction might be immediate retaliation, but awareness creates a small space between feeling and action. In that space, you can ask what the anger represents. Was a boundary crossed? Was an old wound touched? Did someone actually harm you? Or did the situation awaken something from the past? The answer may change what you do next. The same principle applies to fear. Fear may say, run. Awareness can ask, what exactly am I afraid will happen? That question may reveal that the real fear is not the situation itself, but what the situation represents. Perhaps you fear being judged. Perhaps you fear losing control. Perhaps you fear discovering that you are capable of more than you have allowed yourself to become. Perhaps you fear success as much as failure, because success would require you to leave behind the identity you have known. The unconscious is often connected to identity. People become attached not only to what they possess, but to who they believe they are. The successful person may fear failure because failure threatens his identity. The strong person may fear vulnerability because vulnerability threatens his identity. The independent person may fear dependence because dependence threatens his identity. The obedient person may fear freedom because freedom requires responsibility. This is why transformation can feel like death even when nothing physical is ending. An old version of the self is being challenged, and the psyche may resist. We often ask, why am I afraid to change? A deeper question may be, what part of me believes that changing would mean losing who I am? The unconscious protects familiar patterns because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty, even when the familiar pattern causes suffering. A person can remain in an unhealthy situation for years because at least he knows how that situation feels. He may complain about it. He may hate it. He may dream about escaping it. Yet when an opportunity to change finally appears, another fear emerges. What happens if I leave? Who will I become? What will people think? What if the new life is worse? What if I discover that I was the problem? The unconscious prefers known pain to unknown possibility. But consciousness can challenge that preference. It can say, I recognize the fear, but I do not have to obey it. This is where inner freedom begins to develop, not through the elimination of unconscious forces, but through a different relationship with them. You do not need to destroy the unconscious. You cannot. You need to become aware of the ways in which it participates in your life. Notice what repeatedly triggers you. Notice what you envy. Notice what you admire intensely. Notice the people you judge most harshly. Notice the situations you consistently avoid. Notice the excuses that sound different but lead to the same outcome. Notice the dreams that return. Notice the moments when your emotional response seems larger than the event itself. These are not necessarily proof of hidden truths. They are invitations to investigate. And investigation requires humility. You must be willing to discover that your first explanation may not be the complete explanation. Perhaps the person you blame is not entirely responsible for the emotional intensity you experience. Perhaps the obstacle you describe as external is partly connected to an internal fear. Perhaps the quality you despise in another person exists in a smaller or more disguised form within yourself. This does not mean blaming yourself for everything. It means reclaiming responsibility for what belongs to you. That distinction is essential. If you refuse responsibility for your unconscious patterns, they remain outside your control. You continue saying, they make me angry, they make me insecure, they make me afraid. But when you begin asking, why does this affect me so strongly? You reclaim a part of your psychological authority. The world may still behave unpredictably. Other people may still hurt you. Circumstances may still be unfair. But your inner response becomes something you can begin to understand. And what you understand, you can begin to transform. The unconscious is powerful, precisely because it operates beneath the surface. It can influence the direction of a life while remaining invisible to the person living it. Yet, the moment you become willing to look beneath your own explanations, the hidden machinery begins to reveal itself. You start seeing that some of your strongest reactions have histories. Some of your desires have roots. Some of your fears are older than the situations that trigger them. Some of your limitations were learned before you were old enough to question them. And some of the possibilities within you have been waiting for the moment when consciousness finally becomes strong enough to recognize them. There is a part of human nature that most people would rather not examine. We like to think of ourselves as good, reasonable, disciplined, and controlled. We build an image of ourselves that we can comfortably carry into the world. We identify with our kindness, our intelligence, our achievements, our principles, and the qualities we want others to see. But beneath this conscious image exists another dimension of the personality, one that contains impulses, emotions, fears, resentments, desires, weaknesses, and contradictions that do not fit the identity we have constructed. This is where our fear of darkness begins. The darkness within is not necessarily evil. It is simply what we have refused to see, Every human being has qualities that are difficult to accept. There are moments when we become jealous, selfish, arrogant, frightened, resentful, dishonest, controlling, or cruel. There are also moments when we feel desires that contradict our values or experience emotions we believe we should not have. The instinctive response is often rejection. We say, that is not who I am. And perhaps consciously, it is not who we want to be. But denying that a feeling exists does not make us free from it. In fact, the more fiercely we reject a part of ourselves, the more likely it is to operate outside our awareness. We may become convinced that we are incapable of anger while unconsciously expressing it through sarcasm, withdrawal, criticism, or passive resistance. We may insist that we are not jealous while constantly comparing ourselves to others. We may believe that we are endlessly generous while secretly expecting recognition for every sacrifice. The darkness becomes dangerous when we refuse to recognize that it belongs to us. It is easier to see darkness in another person. We notice arrogance in someone else immediately. We recognize manipulation, selfishness, insecurity, dishonesty, and vanity when they appear in another human being. We can describe their behavior with remarkable precision, but when the same quality appears within us, the mind becomes creative. We find reasons, we explain, we justify, we say that our anger was necessary, our jealousy was understandable, our dishonesty was harmless, our control was concern, and our pride was simply confidence. This does not mean that we are always wrong about ourselves. Sometimes anger is justified, sometimes boundaries are necessary, sometimes confidence is healthy, sometimes distrust is wise. The difficulty is that the conscious mind is capable of protecting its preferred image with extraordinary skill. We do not simply want to be good, we want to believe that we are good, and those two things are not identical. The desire to appear good can become stronger than the desire to understand ourselves. This is why confronting the darker aspects of personality can be so uncomfortable. It threatens the story we tell ourselves. If I discover that I am capable of envy, what does that say about me? If I discover that I secretly desire recognition, does that make my achievements meaningless? If I discover that I sometimes manipulate people, can I still think of myself as honest? If I discover that I am afraid, does that mean I am weak? These questions create resistance. We would rather preserve a flattering identity than examine a complicated truth. But human beings are complicated. A person can be loving and selfish, courageous and afraid, generous and jealous, had the chance, confident and insecure, wise in one area and completely blind in another. The presence of contradiction does not make someone inhuman. It makes them human. The problem begins when we demand that we must be only one thing. We create categories for ourselves. I am the strong one. I am the good one. I am the rational one. I am the successful one. I am the victim. I am the responsible one. I am the person who never loses control. Then life inevitably presents a situation that challenges the identity. The strong person breaks down. The rational person becomes irrational. The generous person becomes resentful. The calm person becomes furious. The successful person experiences failure. The person who believes he has everything under control discovers that life cannot be controlled. At that moment, the rejected part of the personality begins to surface. And because it has not been consciously integrated, it can appear with tremendous force. This is why people sometimes surprise themselves. They say something they never imagined they could say. They behave in a way that contradicts everything they believed about themselves. They experience an emotion so intense that afterward they ask, "What happened to me?" Nothing appeared from nowhere. Something that was already present became visible. The darkness did not suddenly enter the personality. The circumstances simply created an opening through which it could emerge. This realization can be uncomfortable, but it can also be liberating. Because if something exists within you, you can begin to understand it. What you refuse to see remains mysterious. What you are willing to observe becomes psychological material. Consider jealousy. Most people dislike admitting that they feel it. Jealousy seems small, unattractive, even shameful. So instead of acknowledging it, a person may transform it into criticism. I don't like that person. They are not actually talented. They only succeeded because they were lucky. They think they are better than everyone. Perhaps some of these judgments are true, but sometimes the intensity of the judgment reveals something else. Perhaps the other person's success touched a desire that you have not allowed yourself to admit. Perhaps what you call dislike is partly recognition. You see something in another person that reminds you of a possibility within yourself. And because that possibility has remained undeveloped, seeing it in someone else becomes painful. The same can happen with admiration. We often assume that intense admiration is entirely about the other person. Yet sometimes what we admire points toward qualities we are capable of developing ourselves. You may admire someone's courage because courage is calling for expression within you. You may admire someone's creativity because your own creativity has been neglected. You may admire someone's freedom because you have spent years living according to expectations that were never truly yours. The qualities that provoke powerful emotional reactions can therefore reveal something about the inner world. This is why the darkness cannot be reduced to everything negative. The rejected self may contain not only destructive impulses, but also unrealized potential. A person who has spent his life being obedient may discover suppressed independence. A person who has always been serious may discover playfulness. A person who has always cared for others may discover personal ambition. A person who has always been controlled may discover passion. The task is not to release every hidden impulse without judgment. It is to become conscious enough to choose what deserves expression and what requires transformation. There is a difference between acknowledging anger and becoming violent. There is a difference between recognizing selfishness and becoming selfish. There is a difference between admitting desire and allowing desire to control every decision. Awareness is not permission. Awareness is responsibility. This distinction is essential because many people misunderstand psychological freedom. They imagine that being authentic means saying whatever they feel, doing whatever they want, and refusing to restrain themselves. But unconscious behavior is not freedom. If anger controls you, you are not free. If jealousy controls you, you are not free. If the need for approval controls you, you are not free. If fear determines every important decision, you are not free. Freedom requires consciousness. You must be able to see the impulse before deciding what to do with it. That is why confronting darkness can actually make a person more disciplined. A person who knows his capacity for anger can recognize its early signs. A person who knows his insecurity can stop pretending that he is completely unaffected. A person who knows his need for approval can begin making decisions without constantly checking how others will react. The hidden impulse loses some of its power when it is brought into awareness. But this process requires courage. Not the dramatic courage of standing in front of an audience or facing an obvious physical danger. A quieter courage. The courage to sit alone with yourself and admit what you would rather deny. To say, I am not as confident as I pretend. I am more afraid than I want people to know. I want recognition. I am jealous. I am angry. I feel lost. I do not know what I am doing. I have been blaming others for something I need to examine within myself. These admissions can feel like weakness, but they can become the beginning of strength. Because once you stop spending energy protecting a false image, that energy becomes available for development. You no longer need to convince everyone that you are fearless. You can learn courage. You no longer need to prove that you are perfect. You can learn responsibility. You no longer need to pretend that you never experience weakness. You can learn how to carry weakness without allowing it to define you. The person who accepts his darkness does not become darker. He becomes more complete. There is something psychologically powerful about no longer needing to divide yourself into acceptable and unacceptable pieces. You can acknowledge the parts of yourself that you are proud of without becoming arrogant about them. You can acknowledge your failures without turning them into an identity. You can recognize your aggression without becoming aggressive. You can recognize your fear without allowing fear to become your master. You can recognize your desire for recognition while learning to act from deeper motives. The more honestly you know yourself, the less easily you are manipulated by your own hidden reactions. And this has consequences beyond the individual. A person who refuses to confront his own darkness is more likely to project it onto others. Projection occurs when we experience something within ourselves but cannot tolerate recognizing it as ours, so we perceive it primarily in someone else. The arrogant person becomes convinced that everyone else is arrogant. The dishonest person becomes obsessed with detecting dishonesty. The person who secretly desires control may accuse others of being controlling. The person who cannot tolerate weakness may despise weakness in others. This can create endless conflict. We fight external enemies while remaining unaware of the psychological material that gives those conflicts their emotional intensity. The world becomes filled with people who seem to represent everything we hate. And sometimes what we hate most intensely outside ourselves is connected to something unresolved within. This does not mean that every external conflict is imaginary. People can genuinely behave badly. Injustice exists. Manipulation exists. Cruelty exists. Boundaries are necessary. But psychological maturity requires the ability to hold two truths at once. Another person may be responsible for their behavior, and you may still be responsible for understanding why that behavior affects you in the way it does. This is where inner work becomes practical. Instead of asking only, why are they like this? You begin asking, why does this situation awaken so much within me? Instead of asking only, how could they treat me this way? You may also ask, what does this experience reveal about my boundaries, expectations, wounds, and fears? These questions do not excuse anyone's behavior. They return your attention to the one person you can actually work with, yourself. And perhaps that is why the darkness deserves to be approached with curiosity rather than hatred. It carries information. It shows where you are divided. It reveals where you have rejected yourself. It points toward fears that still control you and desires that still remain unexamined. It may even reveal strengths that were buried because you were taught they were unacceptable. The hidden darkness becomes less terrifying when you stop imagining it as a monster and begin seeing it as a neglected part of your psychological life. You do not have to love every part of yourself. You do not have to approve of every impulse. You do not have to act on every desire, but you must be willing to know what is there. Because what remains unconscious can influence your choices without your permission. What becomes conscious can be examined. What can be examined can be understood. And what can be understood can gradually become something you no longer fear simply because you refuse to look at it. There comes a point in almost every human life when achievement is no longer enough to answer the questions that begin to rise from within. A person can work, earn, build, travel, fall in love, create a family, gain recognition, and accomplish goals that once seemed impossible, yet still experience a strange emptiness that cannot be explained by circumstances alone. Everything may appear successful from the outside, while something inside is to continues asking a much deeper question: what is all of this for? This question is not a sign of weakness. It is one of the deepest expressions of consciousness. Human beings do not live by survival alone. We need food, shelter, security, relationships, and physical safety. But beyond these necessities exists another hunger, the hunger for meaning. We want to know that our suffering has significance, that our efforts matter, that our existence is connected to something larger than the endless repetition of ordinary days. Without meaning, even comfort can become exhausting. A person can have everything he once wanted and still feel that something essential is missing. He may wake up in a beautiful home, surrounded by possessions, opportunities, and people, yet experience an unexplained sense of distance from his own life. The problem may not be that he has too little. It may be that he has forgotten why he is living. Modern life often teaches us to measure progress through visible results. We count money, followers, titles, possessions, degrees, achievements, and social recognition. These measurements are useful in certain circumstances, but they cannot tell us whether a life feels meaningful from within. A number can tell you how much you have, It cannot tell you why you want it. A title can tell you what position you occupy. It cannot tell you whether the position belongs to the person you are becoming. Success can tell you that you reached the goal. It cannot tell you whether the goal was truly yours. This distinction becomes important because many people spend years pursuing goals they inherited rather than goals they consciously chose. They follow expectations established by family, culture, society, or comparison. They learn what a successful life is supposed to look like, and then they spend their energy constructing that image. But there is a difference between living according to an expectation and living according to an inner sense of meaning. You can become successful at a life that does not belong to you. You can climb the ladder and eventually discover that it was leaning against the wrong wall. This realization can be painful because it forces you to question choices that may have required years of effort. Perhaps you studied something because your family expected it. Perhaps you chose a career because it appeared respectable. Perhaps you remained in a relationship because leaving would disappoint others. Perhaps you pursued wealth because you believed money would finally make you feel secure. Perhaps you built an image of yourself that received admiration but never gave you peace. The deeper question is not whether these choices were objectively right or wrong. The deeper question is whether they expressed something genuinely alive within you. Meaning cannot simply be handed to you from the outside. Someone can tell you what your life should mean. They can give you rules. They can give you goals. They can give you traditions. They can give you expectations. But at some point, you must confront the question yourself. What gives your existence significance? For one person, meaning may be found through creating something that did not previously exist. For another, it may be found in raising children, serving others, teaching, exploring, protecting, healing, discovering, or simply living with extraordinary attention to ordinary life. There is no single formula. Meaning is deeply connected to the individual. This is why comparing your life to someone else's can be so destructive. You may look at another person's achievements and assume they possess the meaning you are missing. You may think, if I had their money, their career, their relationship, their appearance, their influence, then I would finally feel complete. But another person's life cannot provide the answer to your own existence. Their path may be meaningful for them and completely empty for you. The search for meaning, therefore, requires a degree of separation from collective expectations. You must be willing to ask questions that do not always have popular answers. What if the life everyone admires is not the life you actually want? What if your deepest satisfaction comes from something that receives little recognition? What if the thing you are naturally drawn toward seems impractical? What if your greatest contribution does not make you famous? What if meaning is found not in becoming extraordinary in the eyes of the world, but in becoming deeply present within your own life? These questions can be unsettling because the human being is social. We naturally look toward others for guidance. We learn from communities. We seek approval. We want belonging. But belonging can become dangerous when it requires the abandonment of the inner voice. A person can become so concerned with fitting into the expectations of a group that he gradually loses contact with himself. He becomes what is rewarded. He avoids what is criticized. He repeats what everyone else believes. He follows the path because everyone else is walking in the same direction. Then one day he discovers that he has spent years moving without knowing where he was going. Meaning often begins where automatic living ends. It begins when you stop asking only, what should I do? And begin asking, what matters? The difference is enormous. What should I do is often answered by society. What matters requires an encounter with yourself. This is why periods of crisis can become turning points. When an old source of meaning disappears, a person may initially feel lost. A career ends, a relationship changes, a dream fails, a familiar identity collapses. Something that once gave structure to life is suddenly gone. The first reaction may be despair. But beneath despair, there can be a question waiting to emerge. If that old role is gone, who am I now? If that achievement no longer defines me, what remains? If I cannot continue living according to the identity I constructed, what part of me is still alive? These questions can lead toward a deeper form of meaning. Because sometimes meaning is not discovered when everything is going well. Sometimes it appears when the structures we depended upon stop working. Suffering can force the mind to ask questions that comfort allowed it to avoid. This does not mean suffering is inherently good or that pain should be romanticized. Pain can be devastating. Loss can be unfair. Trauma can leave profound wounds. But human beings possess a remarkable ability to transform experience by the meaning they create from it. The event cannot always be changed. The relationship may be gone. The opportunity may be lost. The past may remain permanently outside your control, but your relationship to what happened can evolve. A person may eventually look at an experience that once destroyed his sense of direction and discover that it changed what he values. He may become more compassionate, more courageous, more aware of time, more willing to tell the truth, more willing to live deliberately. The suffering did not become good simply because something valuable emerged from it. But something valuable can still emerge. This is one of the mysteries of meaning. Meaning does not always remove pain. Sometimes it makes pain bearable. A difficult responsibility can become meaningful when you understand why you are carrying it. A sacrifice can become meaningful when it serves something you genuinely value. A period of loneliness can become meaningful when it becomes a time of self-discovery rather than merely an absence of company. Even ordinary work can become meaningful when connected to a purpose larger than immediate reward. The difference is not always in the external activity. It is in the relationship between the activity and the inner life. Two people can perform the same task. One feels trapped, the other feels devoted. The external action may be identical. The meaning is different. This is why the search for meaning cannot be reduced to finding the perfect job, relationship, city, or lifestyle. Those things matter. But meaning is deeper than circumstance. It concerns the way you relate to existence itself. Are you merely consuming life, or are you participating in it? Are you waiting for something to happen before you begin living? Or are you allowing the present moment to become part of your life? Are you constantly asking what the world can give you? Or are you also asking what you are here to contribute? These questions can change the orientation of a person. The hungry mind asks, what can I get? The developing mind begins asking, what can I give? This does not mean abandoning personal ambition. Ambition can be meaningful. Creation can be meaningful. Wealth can be meaningful. Success can be meaningful. But when these things become substitutes for meaning, they eventually reveal their limitations. No amount of external achievement can permanently silence an internal question that has never been answered. You can continue moving upward, you can collect more, you can become more admired, you can become more powerful, and still feel the same emptiness waiting at the center, because the human psyche does not ask only for stimulation. It asks for significance. It wants to feel that its life belongs to something. This is why people can endure extraordinary difficulties when they believe those difficulties serve a meaningful purpose. A person can tolerate exhaustion for the sake of a child. An artist can endure years of rejection for the sake of a creation. A researcher can spend decades pursuing a question because discovering the answer matters deeply to them. Meaning changes the experience of effort. What appears unbearable without purpose can become bearable with purpose. This also means that meaning is not necessarily found by escaping difficulty. Sometimes meaning is found by choosing a difficulty worth carrying. A meaningful life is not necessarily an easy life. It is a life in which difficulty has direction. This is an important distinction in a culture obsessed with comfort. We are often encouraged to remove every inconvenience, avoid every uncomfortable emotion, and pursue constant pleasure. Yet, a life organized entirely around comfort can become strangely empty. Growth requires tension. Creation requires effort. Relationships require responsibility. Truth requires courage. Purpose requires commitment. The question is not whether life will contain difficulty. It will. The question is whether the difficulty is connected to something you consider worth pursuing. Meaning can also transform how you understand time. When a person has no clear sense of meaning, days can blur together. 1 week becomes another. 1 month disappears. Years pass while the person remains busy but internally unmoved. Then there are moments when meaning becomes clear enough that time feels different. You become present. You notice. You participate. You stop waiting for life to begin. You realize that your existence is happening now, not in some imagined future where everything will finally be perfect. This does not eliminate ambition. It changes its foundation. Instead of saying, I will live once I achieve this, you begin saying, I will live while pursuing this. The destination remains important, but the journey is no longer treated as wasted time. And perhaps this is one of the deepest aspects of the search for meaning. Meaning is not always something you discover like an object hidden somewhere in the world. Sometimes it is something you build through the way you live, through responsibility, through love, through courage, through creation, through service, through honest self-examination, through the willingness to remain present, even when life does not provide immediate answers. You may never receive a final explanation for why certain things happened. You may never understand every loss. You may never know exactly what the future requires from you. But uncertainty does not make existence meaningless. It may be the condition that makes genuine choice possible. A life with no uncertainty would require no courage. A life with no suffering would require no endurance. A life with no mystery would require no exploration. The unknown can therefore be frightening and meaningful at the same time. Perhaps the task is not to eliminate every unanswered question. Perhaps the task is to become the kind of person who can live responsibly while some questions remain unanswered. To wake up and ask what deserves your attention. To notice what repeatedly calls you. To recognize what gives you energy rather than merely applause. To distinguish genuine desire from social expectation. To understand which responsibilities are truly yours. To recognize that the world may never give you a perfect definition of success. And to slowly discover that meaning is not waiting somewhere outside you, already packaged and complete, but emerging through the relationship between your inner life, your choices, your responsibilities, your suffering, your love, and the way you decide to participate in the limited time you have been given. There is a moment in a person's life when the question is no longer, how can I become more successful? But something far more difficult. Who am I beneath everything I have been taught to become? From childhood, we are surrounded by expectations. We learn what is considered good, what is considered successful, what makes us worthy, what makes us respectable, what kind of person we are supposed to become. Family gives us one set of expectations. Society gives us another. Education gives us another. Friends, culture, media, relationships, and experiences continue adding layers until the personality we present to the world can become almost impossible to separate from the person underneath. We become accustomed to playing roles: the responsible child, the successful professional, the loyal friend, the strong partner, the intelligent person, the dependable one, the person who never fails. These roles are not necessarily false. They may contain genuine parts of who we are, but no role can contain the whole human being. Eventually, life may create a moment when the role becomes too small. You achieve what you were supposed to achieve, yet you feel strangely empty. You receive the recognition you wanted, yet something within you remains dissatisfied. You become the person others admire, yet when you are alone, you wonder whether you actually know yourself. This is where the deeper process of becoming begins. Becoming who you truly are is not the same as inventing a new personality. It is not about becoming more impressive, more attractive, more powerful, or more admired. It is about removing the layers of false identification that have prevented you from encountering your deeper nature. This process can be uncomfortable because some of those layers were built for survival. You learned to be agreeable because conflict felt dangerous. You learned to be strong because weakness was punished. You learned to perform because attention was given only when you succeeded. You learned to remain silent because your truth created discomfort. You learned to take care of everyone because being needed made you feel valuable. You learned to hide your emotions because vulnerability was treated as weakness. At first, these adaptations may have been useful. They helped you survive your environment. But what protects you in one stage of life can imprison you in another. The adult who still behaves according to childhood fears may appear successful while remaining psychologically trapped inside an identity that no longer fits. This is why becoming yourself often requires questioning the personality you have carefully constructed, not destroying it, understanding it. You must ask where your beliefs came from. Who taught you what success means? Who taught you what failure means? Who taught you what a good life should look like? Which ambitions are genuinely yours? Which ambitions exist because you wanted approval? Which fears belong to the present? Which fears belong to an older version of yourself? These questions can be disturbing because they reveal how much of our identity may have been inherited rather than consciously chosen. A person may spend decades trying to prove something to someone who is no longer present. He may build an entire life around an old criticism. He may continue seeking approval from people who stopped judging him years ago. He may keep trying to become worthy according to standards that were never his own. And because the pattern began early, it can feel like personality rather than conditioning. This is why self-discovery requires patience. You cannot simply decide one morning to become your authentic self and expect every old pattern to disappear. The psyche has history. Every experience leaves traces. Every relationship contributes something. Every rejection can shape expectation. Every success can create attachment. Every failure can create fear. Every role can become part of the identity. The task is to understand these influences without allowing them to determine the entire future. There is a difference between saying, "This is who I am," and saying, "This is what I learned." That distinction can change everything. If you learn to avoid conflict, avoidance is not necessarily your permanent nature. If you learned to distrust people, distrust does not have to become your identity. If you learned to suppress emotion, suppression does not have to remain your way of living. If you learned that your value depends upon achievement, you can gradually discover another foundation for your worth. The deeper self is not always found by adding something new. Sometimes it is revealed